From a high school chemistry teacher who cooked some of the purest meth anyone had ever seen, to the most powerful investigative force on the planet with decades of experience hunting drug manufacturers. In this video, we're exploring whether the real-life FBI and DEA could catch Walter White. First up, we got intelligence. Chemistry genius versus institutional knowledge machine. Walter White operated with a mind built for creating some of the most chemically pure methamphetamine anyone in the region had seen. Throughout Breaking Bad, Walt synthesized methamphetamine using the P2P method, phenyl-2-propanone combined with methylamine through reductive amination. When pseudoephedrine became difficult to acquire, Walt switched synthesis routes seamlessly. His product reached 99.1% purity. The show depicts him achieving unusually high d-enantiomer purity. In reality, this will require chiral catalysts rarely seen outside advanced laboratories. Walt exploited loopholes, created false trails, and outsmarted local police. He calculated dosages to the milligram and predicted reactions 3 steps ahead. When Hank showed him Gale's lab notebook, Walt recognized the chemistry immediately, but played ignorant perfectly. Walt's chemistry intelligence created a product nobody could replicate and kept him ahead of local law enforcement for nearly 2 years. But individual genius hits a ceiling when facing an organization built to hunt people exactly like him. The DEA and FBI spent decades building institutional knowledge designed to track, profile, and dismantle drug manufacturing operations. The DEA's methamphetamine profiling program analyzes impurities, synthesis routes, and precursor chemicals. Most US meth is now produced via P2P-based synthesis with very high purity. They link batches to operations and identify synthesis routes. The FBI's behavioral science units began at Quantico in 1972 and evolved into today's behavioral analysis unit. VICAP, launched nationally in 1985, cross-references violent crime, while narcotic cases use parallel intelligence and analytical methods. While Walt figured out one synthesis route, the DEA tracked every route in the country. The DEA's methamphetamine profiling program infers synthesis routes, identifies impurity patterns, and traces precursor sources. One chemist can perfect one method. An agency with substantial resources tracks every method simultaneously. The DEA's institutional knowledge turns individual brilliance into a data point. So the winner is the FBI and DEA. Individual genius against decades of accumulated institutional knowledge. Walt's chemistry brilliance would make him a fascinating case study after they caught him. But before we dive into how Walt's solo operation compared to the FBI's manhunt infrastructure, if you're enjoying the breakdown so far, make sure to hit that subscribe button. This analysis is just getting started. Walter White's greatest advantage was operating with complete control. No partners to betray him. Walt ran a near-solo operation. Tight circles he controlled completely, with Jesse or Gale only ever as extensions of his plan. Even working with Gus Fring in the Super Lab, Walt maintained psychological control by making himself indispensable. He operated on a need-to-know basis, manipulated Jesse, used Saul as a buffer, and initially kept his family separate, before Skyler later became involved. Total control meant total security. When Hank found a gas mask from Walter's school, Walt stayed calm. When he stole methylamine, he masked up and left nothing usable on camera. But only one person can be in one place. One person can't monitor multiple locations or access federal databases. Walt's solo operation was his armor, complete control, zero betrayals, and total operational security. When the DEA targets a drug operation, they deploy a multi-agency task force that makes solo operations impossible to sustain. The DEA operates through Organized Crime Drug Enforcement Task Force, OCD-ETF, coordinating with the FBI, state police, and US Marshals. These task forces coordinate simultaneous searches across multiple sites. A typical operation involves the DEA, multiple sheriff offices, state police, US Marshals, and Homeland Security investigations. Over a dozen agencies moving simultaneously. The DEA builds cases for months, identifies every associate, tracks every location, and strikes everywhere at once. Walt couldn't watch 6 locations simultaneously. The moment the DEA identified him as a person of interest, they'd activate thousands of personnel. Multi-agency task force eliminates solo operation advantages. When a dozen agencies strike simultaneously, individual control becomes weakness. So once again, the winner is the FBI and DEA. One man controlling every variable against dozens of agencies. Walt's isolation worked until facing a system built to surround and suffocate. Operating alone only mattered if nobody suspected him, which brings us to Walt's most powerful weapon, a mask so convincing that even his own DEA agent brother-in-law never looked twice. Walter White became so unremarkable that he disappeared in plain sight. Walt was a 50-year-old high school chemistry teacher with a pregnant wife and a second job at a car wash. He wore beige. He drove a Pontiac Aztek, And at his birthday party, DEA brother-in-law Hank joked that Walt holding a gun was like Keith Richards with a glass of warm milk. Even when Hank investigated Gale's lab notebook, dedicated to my other favorite WW, he jokingly suggested that it meant Walter White and moved on. The mask worked because people see what they expect. A high school chemistry teacher with financial problems and no criminal record? Invisible. Hank had Thanksgiving dinner with Walt while actively hunting Heisenberg and never connected them. Walt's teacher persona was perfect camouflage against human observation. When people cannot perceive of you as a threat, you become invisible. The FBI's Behavioral Analysis Unit builds psychological profiles that identify criminals regardless of surface presentation. The FBI's Behavioral Science Unit began at Quantico in 1972 and evolved into today's BAU. Between 1972 and the mid-1980s, agents interviewed 36 incarcerated serial killers to build their profiling database. Agents like Robert Ressler coined the term serial killer in 1974. The FBI's criminal investigative analysis process uses 6 steps to classify crime scenes and generate detailed psychological profiles. While the BAU pioneered behavioral profiling for violent crimes, the DEA and the FBI's criminal enterprise analysts apply similar behavioral mapping to drug networks. Walt's profile would light up every red flag: high intelligence, chemistry background, sudden financial changes, proximity to a DEA agent, and a terminal diagnosis creating urgency. Behavioral profiling eliminates those social masks. The FBI analyzes whether behavioral patterns match known criminal profiles. So, once again, the winner is the FBI and DEA. Walt's invisibility fooled individuals. Federal profilers don't care about presentation though. They care about patterns, and patterns never lie. What do you think? Could Walt's teacher persona have fooled FBI profilers? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Walter White built his survival on understanding evidence and eliminating it before collection. Walt cooked in hazmat suits, gloves, and respirators. He cleaned cook sites with industrial-grade chemicals. When he and Jesse dissolved bodies in hydrofluoric acid, Walt calculated which materials would resist the acid. After the cousins' attack on Hank, Leonel Salamanca was silenced in the hospital by Gus Fring's crew. When Hank placed a GPS tracker on Walt's car, Walt found it because he understood surveillance technology. Walt's contamination control worked against Albuquerque PD and even the DA's Albuquerque office. His chemistry knowledge meant that he knew how to destroy evidence, but Walt's methods were designed for 2008 through 2013 technology. Walt's forensic countermeasures defeated local crime scene investigations. His chemistry expertise gave him decisive advantage over standard evidence collection. The FBI and DEA used forensic technology that extracts evidence from surfaces Walt didn't know could hold evidence. The DEA's methamphetamine profiling program determines not just purity, but manufacturing method and likely precursor sources. Walt's reported 99.1% purity would likely flag his products as an exceptional outlier. The FBI's CODIS database contains tens of millions of DNA profiles with continual additions. Touch DNA can sometimes be recovered from brief contact. Modern forensic genealogy, like California investigators use with GED Match to identify the Golden State Killer, shows how DNA databases unmask offenders through family connections. Walt cleaned surfaces he could see. Modern forensics finds evidence humans can't perceive. Touch DNA and advanced gas chromatography mass spectrometry surface evidence that Walt wouldn't account for. The DEA's program tracks P2P-based synthesis methods. Walt's product would be distinctive once impurity profiling is done. Color alone isn't definitive, but the impurity signature and purity level are. All of this operates within legal process, warrant, subpoenas, and court orders. Federal forensic technology operates at a molecular level that makes manual contamination control obsolete. So, once again, the winner is the FBI and DEA. Chemical knowledge against technology that identifies molecular signatures. Walt's contamination control was built for 2008. Federal forensics is designed for 2025 and beyond. Forensic evidence only matters when the suspect breaks under questioning. Walt's psychological control was legendary, but even that has limits when facing interrogation techniques specifically designed to break it. Walter White maintained complete emotional control even when everything collapsed. When Hank confronted Walt in the garage in blood money, Walt didn't panic. Hank punched him, accused him of being Heisenberg, and vowed to put him under the jail. Walt calmly responded that his cancer had returned and Hank would never see him convicted. Throughout 5 seasons, Walt maintained his cover through DEA cookouts, family dinners discussing the case, and direct questioning about Gale's notebook. Walt's emotional control was extraordinary. He didn't crack under pressure, he thrived on it. But Walt's control worked against people who didn't specialize in interrogation. Hank was a field agent, not an interrogator. Walt's psychological control was formidable against standard interrogation. His ability to compartmentalize kept him safe for years. However, FBI interrogators used psychology, rapport building, and exhaustive preparation to systematically break controlled suspects. Federal interview strategies emphasize rapport building and evidence-based questioning. In cases like the Green River Killer, federal and local investigators used rapport-based interviewing over time to elicit detailed admissions from a suspect who had evaded capture for 20 years. Research consistently finds rapport-based, evidence-led interviewing yields higher quality admissions than confrontational methods. Before entering interrogation rooms, agents study every detail: financial records, travel history, known associates. In an FBI interrogation room, Walt wouldn't control anything. Questions would come in waves: aggressive, then sympathetic, creating cognitive dissonance. Interrogators would already know about his chemistry background, financial situation, and brother-in-law's investigation. Walt's mask required sustained performance. Over 6, 8, 12 hours, maintaining that performance becomes impossible. FBI interrogation eliminates environmental control and finds cracks in disciplined psychological defenses. So, once again, the winner is the FBI and DEA. Walt's ice-cold control against FBI interrogators who broke in criminals with decades more experience? His psychological discipline would last hours. Their techniques are designed to last days. If you thought Walt's control under pressure was impressive, wait until you see what happened when everything fell apart. Walter White understood that vanishing meant becoming someone else entirely. In Breaking Bad's final season, Walt used Saul's disappearer, Ed Galbraith, to create a new identity. Walt disappeared to a cabin in New Hampshire under the name Lambert. He lived alone for months with no contact, no digital footprint, no paper trail. The show demonstrated that with proper preparation, completely vanishing was possible. Walt's disappearance worked because chaos fractured the investigation. His pursuers were dead or scattered. Hank was dead. The DA investigation had lost its primary driver, but that only worked because federal law enforcement wasn't actively searching. Walt's disappearance was effective against a fractured investigation. Professional identity creation works when nobody is actively looking, though. When the FBI classifies someone as a fugitive, they activate nationwide infrastructure designed to make disappearing impossible. The FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives list has led to the capture of hundreds of fugitives, many through citizen cooperation. They flag passports, monitor financial activity, and coordinate with internal agencies. Whitey Bulger disappeared for 16 years with money and connections. The FBI still found him using aged photographs and forensic software. NGI's face search works across large law enforcement image repositories like booking photos and ID databases. If the FBI connected Walter White to methamphetamine manufacturing and reclassified him as an active fugitive, the entire infrastructure would activate. Ed's service kept Walt off the grid with no formal work or ID trail. Any attempt to re-enter normal life would have blown his cover. Once designated a priority fugitive, coordinated checks across financial systems, identification databases, and facial recognition compressed timelines dramatically. Federal manhunt infrastructure turns disappearance into a high-stakes race. Coordinated federal systems create converging pressure that makes sustained anonymity increasingly difficult. So, once again, the winner is the FBI and the DEA. Walt disappeared because nobody was hunting him with full federal resources. Against an activated FBI manhunt, the odds shift dramatically against long-term evasion. Walter White was brilliant, methodical, precise. For nearly 2 years, he cooked the purest methamphetamine ever created, operated directly under the DEA's nose, and built an empire while having family dinners with his brother-in-law, the DEA agent. But all of that worked because he was facing local law enforcement with limited resources, and a brother-in-law who psychologically couldn't imagine Walt as a criminal. He exploited blind spots. He stayed small enough to avoid federal attention. The FBI is an institution, thousands of agents, decades of research, technology operating beyond human limitations, and infrastructure spanning the country. The Bureau doesn't need to outthink him, they just need to apply their systems. Walt's intelligence was extraordinary. The FBI's intelligence, though, is institutional. Walt operated alone with complete control. The FBI operates as a coordinated machine. Walt cleaned his crime scenes with chemistry knowledge. The FBI has forensic labs analyzing molecular signatures Walt didn't know existed. If Walter White existed in the real world with his exact profile, chemistry teacher, brother-in-law to DEA agent, sudden financial changes, terminal diagnosis, the question becomes how long before federal systems identified him. Walt survived because he exploited the psychological blind spot of family connection and operated below the threshold that triggers full federal attention. The moment the DEA's methamphetamine profiling program analyzed samples of his exceptionally pure product made through P2P-based synthesis, the clock would start ticking. The moment analysts identified a chemist with access to industrial precursors in the same geographic area, they'd narrowed the suspect pool. The moment Walt's financial records show inexplicable cash flows, red flags would multiply. One man with chemistry knowledge versus the most powerful investigative force in the world? This is an evidence-informed analysis. Walt's brilliance could outrun local blind spots. Against coordinated federal systems with modern technology and institutional expertise, the odds swing sharply the other way. The game would shift from Walt's control to federal infrastructure. And the most tragic part, Walt would have understood this perfectly. That's why he stayed small. That's why he stayed local. Because the moment the FBI got fully involved, everything he built for 2 years would face systematic dismantling. If you enjoyed this breakdown, make sure to subscribe with notifications on, and check out our video on every Dexter villain compared to their real-life inspirations.